has, of course, also a positive value, but it's interesting to see when you relate the idea of freedom to human rights. The Russian Church a few years ago has published a paper on human rights, and the idea is that they would stress the rights of the group always above the rights of the individual. So the group rights are more important than individual rights. And mostly we in our Western civilization and our Western thinking, we would underline the rights of the individual. And then you have a group can be a religious community, a group can be a nation, a group can be family, of course, society, and in the end it would mean that the rights of the human rights, the rights of the individual have to how would you say, have to be withdrawn or have to be less important in regards to, or with regards when compared with the rights of the respective group. There has been a very harsh debate and an argument between the Protestant churches, the communion of Protestant churches in Europe, and the Russian Orthodox Church because of this paper. So freedom must not be understood here as individual freedom or as individual freedom, but more as freedom, so to say, as a kind of a framework or of system, but within this framework the group rights are much more important than the individual ones. Let's come to language, next point. There is a stress you can always see of the importance of the Russian language. And of course one has to see in Russia, in the Russian Empire and in Soviet Union, the Russian language was the instrument of communication. It was, you had a unique, not unique, but unified TV program. So in every republic you had at least one Russian or two Russian channels. If you want to make any career, you had to do it in Russian. You could not do a career in Armenian or Georgian or Latvian or Ukrainian, but Russian was the language the elite spoke amongst themselves. So the Russian language was and still is very important. It's maybe a funny detail, or when you look at the crisis in Ukraine, many people are bilingual, and you have a lot of people, Ukrainian and Russian, almost everyone at least understands both languages. Many people have one of the two languages which is their first. So you should ask, for example, when you dream, when you sleep and you have a dream, in which language do you dream, or which is your first reaction, or how would you write a poem, or how would you address your mother, in which language. So you can see what is the first language, but they can easily switch to the other language. And for example, when in 1.5 years, no, it was 1 year ago. 1 year ago when we had these protests on Maidan, on the Kiev square, and you remember maybe one of the main personalities was the boxer Klitschko, who is today the mayor of Kiev, and he was one of the main opponents of the former President Yanukovych, and one of the main proposers for the independence of Ukraine and the European Western orientation of Ukraine. But he doesn't speak Ukrainian very well. He spoke Russian. He addressed the crowd in on the place, on the square, so to say, against the Russians and for Ukrainians in Russian language, because he was born somewhere in another Soviet republic, and he attended a Russian language school. So Ukrainian is a more difficult language for him, and his first and natural, so to say, language is Russian. The church said that the parishes abroad, which they have abroad, should enable language lessons. Mostly they fear that people who live abroad, Russians who live abroad, lose their connections with the Russian language and with the Russian culture. So they are very interested in keeping them in this framework, so to say, of the Russian culture. It is an interesting issue. I discussed this in the last days with several people, because we have a special tradition here in North America with immigrants for generations already who came, and then the question, how can you preserve an identity? What does it mean? I have a friend of mine is a Ukrainian priest in Hamilton, Ontario, and he was born in Ukraine and studied in Ukraine, and he came 15 years or 20 years ago, he came to Canada, and now he's a priest there. And I've been few times in his parish, and there's a group of people. The poor man has to have 2 liturgies every Sunday, which he cannot merge because there's a group in the parish who wants liturgy in English and another one wants liturgy in Ukrainian. And what does it mean to be Ukrainian when you are a 4th generation Canadian who has never been to Ukraine, who doesn't know any word of Ukraine, but who has a Ukrainian name and belongs to the Ukrainian parish? So I think in the course of time, this question of identity and belonging to a national or religious group in another context becomes more and more tough. And I understand, and of course one can respect and accept the ideas that the church abroad should be a place where people can preserve their identity and their language, and the church always in such situations has also a social significance. People come for liturgy and for church, but also to meet fellow Russians in another country and to have tea with them afterwards and to talk with them and so on. This strengthening of the and underlining of the Russian language does not necessarily mean an affront to other languages. Patriarch again, I think it would be completely possible to support centers for learning Ukrainian, Belarusian or Moldavian languages in our parishes abroad, everywhere where such a need exists. So it's not, there is an importance and an important meaning of the Russian language, but it does not mean a complete exclusion, so to say, of the other languages. And this quotation fits to the idea of the Russian Orthodox Church to be a multinational church, which is Russian Orthodox, but it is multinational, as Russia is a multinational country where a lot of minority groups exist and have the right to have schooling in their language and TV in their language and so on. So you can see it here as well. I'm not sure whether such centers exist, but the idea is in every every case the idea is existing. Yeah, maybe one I would add just for this. The time will come and we will see how it develops and what significance and what kind of activities the Russian Orthodox parishes abroad will have. Nowadays also it is easier, of course, to communicate. You have internet, it's cheaper simply to travel to the other country. The generation which immigrated 100 years ago, they said farewell and went to the other country and never came back. And now there is much more exchange and communication, but it will be interesting to see how it develops and what does it mean to be, as I just said, what does it mean to be Ukrainian or to be Russian in 50 years' time for people who for generations live here, speak English, feel themselves as American citizens and do not speak any Russian, but they would say, I'm Russian or I feel Russian. So it will be an interesting point and an interesting issue. I found a very funny quotation from the Patriarch about young people who aggrandize themselves with an acquired accent. These young people like to speak Russian with a foreign accent, and thus they refuse the Russian language, the Russian culture, the Orthodox faith. It's interesting because no one would think that no one would link the language and the faith, but the Patriarch does. And his ideas, of course, these people, as you have in the brackets above, who want to speak with an acquired accent, who want to look like Americans, Germans, French, and so on, and speak with this accent. But the fear, I think you can here see the fear of losing the connections with the native country, with the native culture, language, and that would mean for him also with the faith. Let's come to the nation and to the political sphere. As I just mentioned concerning the language, the Russian word is a supranational project. So you have seen in my comments so far and in my quotations I brought so far, it includes also Ukraine, Moldova, Belarus, sometimes Kazakhstan, and so on. So it's not the idea Russifying, so to say, all the area, but rather to unite somehow this area with the persistent existence of several different nations, but of course with an important role of Russia. It relates, the Russian word relates to Rus, to the historical form of state I mentioned before, not to Russia. It's an interesting point that in the Russian language you can make a difference. So when you have, for example, when you speak about the language, you would say Russian language, which is Ruski, is the Russian word. Ruski Yazyk, Russian language. When you speak about the country, Russia, the Russian Federation, they use another word. It's not Ruski, but Rossiyski. So it relates to Russia. In German we have a translation which is not very, very good, and I fear my English translation of this German translation of the Russian original is also not very good. But you can try to, maybe it's easier to understand when you have Russian language, but Russian Ländisch country. So no, the one is the culture, the ethnicity, the people, Russian, and the other is the state, which relates to the states. So when Russians speak about, for example, their government, they would not say it is the Russian government, because Russian is the language, but it is the government of the Rossiyski. They use the other word. So they make a differentiation which is important and not so easy to follow in our languages, in our Western languages. So that means it belongs to Rus, to this historical form, and not to modern Russia. And it means that then the model of the Russian world is open and inclusive, so to say, for people who feel, who feel that they belong to this cultural model. So if people in Ukraine or if Ukrainians would feel it is part of their cultural model and of their culture, then they are invited, so to say, to belong also to this Russian world project and Russian world concept, which can be seen on the one hand as an open-minded, so to say, approach. On the other hand, if you do not want to belong to it and you have an invitation, it can sound also a little bit imperial, so to say. The Metropolitan Ilarion said a few years ago, peoples, he's speaking about peoples which until a short time ago felt as a united people and which form until today a united spiritual cultural space. This is an interesting quotation because it shows us somehow the core of the problem. Until a short time ago, does it mean until the end of the Soviet Union or until the end of the Russian Empire? They felt as a united people. I'm not so sure whether they really felt as a united people. He sees them, the Russian side sees them as a united people, but for the Ukrainians, for example, a lot of them did not have these feelings that they're united, but they rather had the feeling we are different. We are another people, we are not the same people, not united people. And then it is a kind of an unfriendly takeover, so to say. When the Russians come and say, okay, we are all united, we are one people and we all belong together. And it is without doubt that they belong to a united spiritual cultural space. The languages are similar, religion is similar, and so on. There is a spiritual cultural space, but it does not automatically mean that it is one united people. The Russian world and the countries of the Russian world are frequently compared to the European Union. Because the European Union is an integration process as you know, in Western Europe, which is successful in the sense that many nations wanted to become members, and it has somehow managed, one can dispute it especially now with the Greek crisis, but in principle it has managed to give people a European Union identity, which most people probably have. We have a passport where it's written first is European Union and only then you have Federal Republic of Germany. But nevertheless, no one has lost his or her national identity. So people feel like Dutch, Danish, German, French, and so on, but also as European. So it is I don't want to praise it too much, but I think it's a kind of success story. And so the Russian world the church representatives try to represent it or to present it, to show it also as a success story, but they even say, we do have, in the Russian world, we do have common spiritual foundations. We come from the same, you remember, from the same baptismal font in Kiev. And therefore, our integration processes within the Russian world countries can even be more successful than the European one. They believe that they have the better model and the better integration process model, so to say, than the European Union. And a point which is, I think, important, which is of course completely true, modern borders between states do not abolish cultural commonalities. When you have a common cultural space, a common linguistical space, you feel this kind of belonging together. And of course it is not interrupted and abolished by introducing state borders. But nevertheless, this is the problem in Ukraine, nevertheless, of course we have all agreed to respect state borders. And the question is probably to diminish the significance of state borders. Like, again, last time for today, I will I will remember to the European Union model. We have no passport controls. You can go within the European Union, travel freely. We have, a lot of countries have the same currencies, the same money. And then the state borders is not so important anymore for our awareness. We know when I cross the border and I go to the Netherlands, I know that I'm now abroad and everything is in Dutch and they have other traffic signs and so on. But it's not so important to be in another country. As I mentioned, I will say, no, maybe I go, no, not conclusion, but I will stay here. So I tried to give you a survey of the most important elements of the church understanding of the Russian world concept. And as I had these topics of values of religion, of language, of the national sphere and so on, and as it became important in the last 2 years or 1.5 years since the Ukrainian crisis, I want to give you a short overview and a short couple of informations about the ecclesial situation in Ukraine, which is quite complicated. First of all, we have 3 competing Orthodox churches. There is the vast majority of Ukraine is traditionally Orthodox, and we had an Orthodox church for a century which officially belonged to the Russian Orthodox Church. So it was a part of the Russian Orthodox Church. And after the independence of Ukraine in 1990 or 1991, when the Soviet Union fell apart, the church split, and nowadays we have 3, we have more, but the others are very small and unimportant. So we have 3 larger competing Orthodox churches. And regretfully, if you study it or if you have a look on the website, they all have almost the same name. Ukrainian Orthodox Church, and then in brackets we have Moscow Patriarchate, Ukrainian Orthodox Church, Kiev Patriarchate, and Ukrainian Autocephalous Orthodox Church. So all of them call themselves Ukrainian Orthodox churches. The base on which, or the claims, so to say, of these churches are that the Kiev Patriarchate and the Autocephalous Church, which I will not deal now with broadly, claim to be a national church of Ukraine, completely independent, or as you say in Orthodox, the Autocephalous Church of Ukraine, which has nothing to do with any other church, and this means especially nothing with the Russian Orthodox Church. The problem is that only the third church, the Ukrainian Orthodox Church of the Moscow Patriarchate, is canonically recognized. That means all other Orthodox churches in the world accept as the true church in Ukraine, exclusively the church in communion with the Moscow Patriarchate. The other churches are regarded as schismatics, as non-existent. And for example, if a bishop or a priest from Greece, from Constantinople, from here, or from Serbia would come to Ukraine, he would communicate and celebrate liturgy only with these people, because the others are regarded by him as schismatics, as not official churches. So, and the Ukrainian Orthodox Church of the Moscow Patriarchate, it means the canonical church, is the largest church in Ukraine. It has the largest number of parishes. Within this church, I will concentrate now on this church. Within this church, we have an inner split, which is not maybe a split is a too hard word, but it is a movement, so to say, or two larger groups, because of the different political options. There is one group of priests, of bishops, and of faithful who, and as far as I can see, I would say it is the larger group, the majority group, a group which agrees with the political options of the Ukrainian government. They would regard Crimea as part of Ukraine, and they would say in eastern Ukraine it is Ukrainian territory and it is an aggression from the side of Russia, and people there were not threatened by fascism or whatever you can hear. And a smaller group within this church would be more reluctant, let's say, maybe even not. I did not see anyone, or maybe only a very few priests, but for example no bishop who would agree with Putin's position on Ukraine, with the Russian position. So the problem of this church is that it is in communion with the Moscow Patriarchate. It has a certain, but not full, but a certain independence, but a certain degree also of dependence from Moscow. But it has a political